The Heckman equation, developed by Nobel laureate James Heckman, argues that high-quality birth to five early childhood education for disadvantaged children yields a 13% annual return on investment through improved health, education, and economic outcomes. It emphasizes that early investments provide the highest returns, focusing on comprehensive, high-quality care that supports both the child and working parents.
Welcome back to Nurturing Humboldt, folks. This is Karina Virgen, your host. Nurturing Humboldt is a podcast by First Five Humboldt where we uplift the people, stories, and the ideas that support families and young children in our community. Today's conversation is all about early childhood, why it matters, how we support it, and the people behind the work. I'm joined by Star, who works in supporting the childcare workforce here in Humboldt and brings a deep understanding of what children and families need to thrive. I am really excited to have you here today, Star. Hi.
Good morning. I'm excited to be here.
I'm so excited to have you. For those that don't know your background, let's just go ahead and jump right in. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and what led you to work with children and families and your current work today?
Well, I can't really talk about my background without talking about my education. I was home educated, and I was home educated in the unschooling homeschool movement. Unschooling is a philosophy of education that's very child-led, interest-driven, and trusts and honors children for who they are and where they are. It isn't just school at home, but encourages children to self-direct most of their time and activities and learn through daily activities with their families. And I actually went to public school for the first time at the age of 15. And I grew up living off the grid, which not all homeschoolers do, but that was just the life that we lived. We didn't have electricity, running water, TV, or even indoor plumbing. We cooked on a wood stove and used candles and kerosene lanterns for light when I was a child. I'm unusual in my generation. And I'm the oldest of five kids. I'm 8, 12, 15, and 23 years older than my siblings. So I took care of them a lot. But not only did I have a lot of experience with young children, they just always have gravitated towards me. When I was 15 and my little brother and his 4-year-old friends were all following me around with their little moon eyes, I joked that it's too bad I didn't have a bunch of kids my age following me around like that. Then when I went to college, I was an undeclared major for 2 whole years. So it took me 5 years to graduate. I tried sociology, social work, psychology, anthropology, and eventually I got my degree in liberal studies, child development, and a minor in Spanish. I spent a semester in Mexico, but I always had an eye towards doing parent education or policy work or systems change. I wasn't at all interested in being a teacher or in being part of the institution of education, having always lived outside it. But it turns out that's what I was qualified for when I got my degree and what I knew how to do, and I was pretty good at. And so I ended up being a very passionate preschool teacher for almost 25 years. I do have to mention the AEYC, National Association for the Education of Young Children. I would never have stayed in the field as long as I have without being involved in our local chapter and the regional chapter. And I even ended up working for the California Association for the Education of Young Children for a couple of years. But our local chapter of the National Association for the Education of Young Children is the professional organization for early childhood. I was invited to a meeting by a coworker early in my career, and I've stayed involved ever since. I cannot stress enough the difference that the connections I've made there have made in my life and career. Not only did I gain experience there and grow my job skills, but I also met people who've been lifelong mentors, friends, and professional connections. As a board member of the Humboldt Association for the Education of Young Children, which is now the Redwood Coast chapter of the California Association for the Education of Young Children, because it includes Del Norte County, I had the opportunity to work on the Worthy Wage campaign and learn about advocacy for the early childhood workforce. I held positions as NorCal rep, public policy chair, and eventually I was the president. And through it all, I developed an identity as a professional. I learned communication skills, and I felt like I was a member of a really supportive early childhood educator community. And it was the contacts they made in AUIC that led me to all of my most important job opportunities, and indeed to the job I have now at First Five Humboldt. I first met Marianne, the ED, at one of those early meetings, probably about 30 years ago. Although I am no longer in the classroom, my work now is focused on supporting childcare providers who are. I administer the quality improvement grants, which reward childcare providers for extra professional development and quality improvement of their programs. Modeled after the original Worthy Wages idea, which recognizes that early childhood is underpaid and undervalued work, and the subsequent staff turnover it causes is harmful to children. It is designed to reward providers for some of what they already do and provide incentives to help keep them in their jobs. I've also been pushed out of my comfort zone as a classroom teacher, learning how to be a trainer for adults. And so I've been able to become a trainer in a variety of subjects that the early childhood community has expressed as training needs. So now I can provide training in trauma-informed practice, the Ages and Stages questionnaire, strengthening families, the 5 protective factors, teaching pyramid, TK, community resiliency model. I just finished the Beginning Together Inclusion Institute, so I can teach those courses, and I am also certified in adult self-care and self-awareness. I'm also an outdoor classroom specialist 1, and I'm currently a UC Master Gardener in training. Gardening with children is one of my most favorite activities in the whole world.
Thank you, Star. That was really helpful context. I love hearing how our environment and our community really shapes us as people. And I think watching you work, and for all of you out there that know Star, you bring a level of empathy and compassion, unlike many folks. So it's really nice to hear about your background and all the things you offer our community.
Thank you.
Yeah. Now, I'm guessing this answer maybe we can talk about it in a couple different ways, but I'm curious to pick your brain. How do you think your earlier experiences shaped the way you see children and learning today? Because you had a pretty unique upbringing.
I did. I did. And one of the things that I got to see when I was growing up, I saw it firsthand and I experienced it, was what it's like to see children learn things when they're ready. That when you try really hard to push someone and they aren't ready, it's sort of a struggle. And eventually they may get it, but there may be tears and there may be resistance and there may be frustration. Whereas if you approach them when they are ready to learn something, they can just jump right on it and you can see that progression. And so that's what a teacher does, providing those learning provocations, the environment, the materials, the questions, and the time and a space to experiment. That allows children to follow their interests and learn at their own pace. I think that's why I felt so at home when I got to early childhood, because when done right, a child-centered, play-based, developmentally appropriate environment is a lot like what I experienced as a child. You embed all the learning into the play, so it doesn't always look like what we traditionally think of as learning in school. But I think it's a mistake when we try to turn preschools into mini kindergartens or kindergarten into first grade in the race to quote unquote school readiness. Where they are right now is an important stage of development, and all these early experiences are setting the stage for everything that comes later in life. So if a child knows how to share space and materials with others, make friends, solve social conflicts, and get their needs met in a group, then they'll be set for learning more formal academic skills when they're a little older. Just one example, they need to play in the sand and Play-Doh and use their hands to climb and swing, just to develop the muscle strength and dexterity to hold a pencil correctly, to learn to write their names.
Wow, I think that's a really important perspective, especially in this field. I don't know. I think our world often pushes us to rush things for whatever outcome it's needed. So that at its own pace kind of perspective is, I think, really important. Now, I want to talk about a big picture issue here that I think many people in your field, all people who work in your field, probably feel and have heard. Um, so there's a phrase often used in early childhood being one of the most important, but also one of the most undervalued fields. Why do you think that is?
Oh, well, that could take the rest of our time. That's a very big issue. But I think we can boil it down to just a few important aspects. The main thing is that early childhood is so important because of how much a child's brain develops before the age of 5. Their early experiences set them up for the rest of their lives on so many levels. Our brains double in size in the first year of life, and a young child's brain is making more than 1 million synapses, neural connections, every second between birth and age 5. Because of that rapid development, we are more susceptible to early stress and trauma. And if it's severe and prolonged enough, those factors can actually alter brain development and leave lasting harm. The good news is that our brains are resilient and we can come back from and grow through many hardships. But we will, of course, benefit far more from being in nurturing, enriching, loving environments that stimulate our brains and teach us social skills. Now, due to the importance of this work and the challenges inherent in it, the regulations and the licensing and the safety considerations, in addition to all of the educational pieces, being a childcare provider requires a relatively high level of education, certification, and professional development. Just as with a teaching credential, a child development permit requires supervised teaching experience, specific coursework, and ongoing professional development for renewal. But unlike a teaching credential, the pay structure in early childhood is not commensurate with the education required. And many preschool teachers and childcare workers don't even make a living wage. I only was able to stay in the classroom as long as I did because my husband made twice as much money as I did. Just to give you an idea, when I was in the classroom and my own son was in my classroom, I paid half my paycheck back to the school to have him there. I remember when I was an early teacher, um, my grandmother, well, my cousin was a lawyer. She worked at the EPA, and my grandmother kept asking me, "So, Star, when are you going to get a real job?" And it was one of my greatest successes that before she died, I was able to somehow impart to my grandmother the importance of my work and that it was a real job and that it was a true calling and a commitment. And she got it. And I feel so gratified that I was able to convince her of that. That being said, I wasn't able to afford to buy a house until I was 45 years old. So the other issues are because the issue of how childcare is funded, it is not publicly subsidized across the board the way that elementary school is. Childcare is perceived as women's work. And across the nation, it's not just women, but predominantly women of color. And so that's a whole other layer of undervaluing that is at play in the salaries that you see in early childhood. And then children don't have lobbyists or spend money. So it's really hard to argue the public good of publicly funded childcare when there isn't really an industry with money behind it to lobby on their behalf. And there are some amazing minds at work, and I'm just going to name a few that I know, but Elliot Haspel, Dan Worry, and James Heckman, and I'm sure there are many others. They're doing some amazing work on the issue of childcare funding and structure. But we're living in particularly difficult political times to move the needle right now in terms of funding childcare as a public good for all.
Thank you, Star. I feel like, yeah, like what you said, we could dive into this topic probably for like 3 episodes because it is very multi-layered. So I appreciate you trying to tackle it in the time that we have. Now, understanding everything you just said, what does quality care look like? So, what does it look like when a childcare environment truly honors childhood? And I want to talk about this because I think it's one of those things where, understanding that it's an underpaid field and some of the people that work the hardest, but they're still trying to make wonderful things happen in the childcare environment. What does it look like when childcare really honors childhood? I think you have a good perspective on this.
Well, I do have some ideas. I think the environment should meet the children where they are. at whatever developmental level and ability they are, and that's not always the same as age. And it should nurture creativity, exploration, and connection with others. It shouldn't be a means to an end like kindergarten readiness or school success, but should just be valued for the important time it is. Because early childhood, as I said before, it's really the foundation for everything else in life. And of course, you're going to build the skills for school success and kindergarten readiness if you're providing a rich and diverse experience and materials for the children, but that shouldn't be the only goal. Number one, the best early childhood environment starts with nurturing stable relationships that the adults in the environment make with the children and families, and then extends to the environment that should be child-centered, play-based, developmentally appropriate, and culturally sensitive. Young children need to play most of the time. That's how they learn and work things out. So teachers create opportunities for learning through play. Children need to spend a lot of time outdoors and being active. They have not learned to regulate their bodies and emotions, to sit still and focus for long periods of time. And we can cite a lot of research that shows the beneficial effects of nature and outside play for not just cognitive development, but social and emotional and self-regulation as well. I also think it's important to look at group size. For many children, a childcare environment can be overwhelming because of just the numbers of children in it. And so it's important to pay attention to how many teachers or adults there are to children so that each child can get enough attention.
To make that possible, we really have to support the people doing the work, and a lot of your work focuses on supporting childcare providers. Why is investing in the workforce so important to children and families?
The reality is that most people need to work, and their children are going to need to be somewhere while they are working. So we want those environments where our children are going to spend a large part of their days to be the best they can be for them, right? Lots of families piece together childcare with creative family work schedules and help of relatives and neighbors. But some rely fully on outside childcare sites. And if we uplift the early childhood educators at those sites with support, resources, training, and the community they need, they will be able to offer higher quality services and better meet each child and family's needs. And I am saying early childhood educator purposefully, even when it's perhaps a FFN, which is a family friend neighbor unlicensed childcare provider. We want to recognize the work that they are doing as education and uplift its importance by using that language. Especially family childcare providers, they may not identify with teacher. And I tend to say teacher a lot because I was a teacher in the preschool classroom, but a family childcare provider, yes, they may identify as a teacher, but they are always going to be an early childhood educator, even if they don't.
I appreciate that clarity for folks. I think it brings a level of just like honoring the work. And I think, a lot of us tend to diminish what we do. And so this is really uplifting.
Yes, absolutely. Childcare is also an important part of our economic infrastructure, which I think we got to see during the pandemic shutdown. Everyone recognized on a really visceral level the importance of childcare. But unfortunately, that realization was incredibly short-lived. And when things opened up again, the childcare crisis, which consists of the low pay leading to teacher shortages and turnover, which in turn leads to closed classrooms and programs, which leads to not enough childcare available for those who need it, was even worse after the pandemic happened.
Those are some great points to reflect on. Now, I am taking advantage of having you here to pick your brain on many things. So for one of the things I want to talk about are protective factors. For people who may not be familiar, can you explain what protective factors are and why they matter so much for families?
Well, I can outline the 5 protective factors that we mainly talk about, but put simply, protective factors are those things we need to thrive in life in our communities. And we're not talking about just survival, we're talking about thriving. So that means you have basic needs met, like housing, transportation, food, and work. So you're not in constant struggle, but feel like you have some space to relax. You feel connected to a community, and you have social supports. And you understand what your child is going through at each stage and how to respond to ensure that they grow to their optimal best. And you know where to look and who to ask if you need help with any of those things. And so the 5 protective factors go through each of those in more detail, and I'll just list them for you now. Parental resilience, social connections, knowledge of parenting and child development, concrete support in time of need, and social emotional competence of children. Now, all of these are important to families because raising children can be hard. Adulting can be hard for all of us sometimes. And when we're stressed, let's say we can't pay our bills, we have that knot in our stomach of wondering which one to pay, and then our power is about to get shut off and we can't afford to fix our car, buy enough groceries, and our kid whines for a toy in the grocery store. It can really push us over the edge. Protective factors is the idea that we all need support of some kind at some point in our parenting journey. It may be basic needs or parenting support or information about health insurance, but everyone can benefit from some kind of support. And if we feel we have somewhere to go or someone to ask for help or that there's a light at the end of the tunnel of stress, we're less likely to take that stress out on that child who is just doing what children do developmentally when they fall on the floor in the grocery store because you won't get them the plastic toy that caught their eye.
Protective factors is such a big key piece in our work here at First Five and in our conversations. And alongside that, it's also the awareness around trauma and its impact. And you mentioned a little bit earlier about how you do this type of work, trauma-informed care. What does it mean to create a trauma-informed environment for young children? And what can it actually look like in practice?
Trauma-informed practice is a concept that recognizes that many of us have experienced trauma, especially early childhood trauma. There's been a lot of work done in our community around the ACEs study, and that was a landmark study 30 years ago that looked at people from across all walks of life and discovered that we all have quite a bit of early childhood trauma in our past, regardless of socioeconomic status or race. And early childhood trauma affects our development and later life. It has health implications. And like I mentioned earlier, too much stress over a long time period or really severe stress called toxic stress can actually alter brain development. So we know it exists in our community. We know that many people are experiencing it or have experienced it. And a trauma-informed environment is designed to not only recognize and actively heal that trauma, but also to set us up moving forward to not re-traumatize or perpetuate trauma through actions or environment. It only takes one person in a child's life who really sees them and develops a stable, nurturing relationship with them, lets them know they are loved and cared for and special. Just one person can make a huge difference for a child experiencing toxic stress. That relationship can buffer them enough from the stress to be able to develop more normally and eventually to thrive. And that's why, sometimes we use the language, you can be that one person, because anybody who is volunteering, who is working with CASA or Big Brothers, Big Sisters that we used to have, but even just being a friendly neighbor, you can be that one person in someone's life. And as I mentioned before, in the classroom and in the childcare environment, stable, nurturing relationships are absolutely key to trauma-informed childcare environment. A predictable environment is the next factor. That's because children who've experienced trauma have had all control removed from them when bad or stressful things happen. I mean, young children don't have a lot of control in their lives anyway, but when something is happening around them that they have no control over, they feel an extra sense of loss of control. So they will be able to calm their nervous systems more easily in an environment that they know what to expect. This means that transitions between activities will be minimized, and when they do happen, they'll be treated with sensitivity and with a plan. A variety of sensory activities can be offered throughout the day because these are some of the best ways for children to calm their central nervous systems. And sensory activities can include things like sand, water, cornstarch mixed with water, Play-Doh, even paint. Sometimes children will just get in the paint. They will use their hands instead of the paintbrush, and sometimes that's because that's what they need. And of course, lots of social emotional learning and coaching. Most young children need support identifying and expressing emotions and problem solving with each other. Children who have experienced trauma especially need this support because they may not have felt safe to express emotions, or the trauma they experienced may have affected their ability to identify those sensations connected to the emotions, and they may need some more practice with this. And finally, like I mentioned before, a busy early childhood education environment can feel overwhelming to many. So you may need to build a space for children to have safely supervised alone time. Little nooks and areas where they can play alone or read a book quietly if they need to get away from the busyness of the full classroom, but you can still see them. Sometimes that can be a really important way for children to self-regulate when they feel like it's too much to be in a classroom or even a childcare home with multiples of children.
I think those are all such great reminders too for parents, and maybe just some little tips for the home as well, or just simple reminders of what goes into creating spaces that really hold children. Now, Star, even with the challenges in this field, I would love to close out our interview by asking you, what gives you hope when you think about the future of early childhood, especially here in Humboldt?
Well, I'm hopeful about the future of early childhood because I am constantly inspired by the childcare providers. And I've been there, so I know what it's like. And they exhibit a deep commitment to support children and families, to learn all they can about meeting their needs, the children's needs, and the family's needs, and to create amazing learning environments. Despite everything we've just talked about, the difficulties families face in parenting and in finding childcare, the challenges childcare providers have in meeting all those children's needs, as those children come to them with increasing levels of stress or disabilities or family crises, the completely unrealistic funding structure that keeps wages in early childhood low. Despite all those things, early childhood educators keep showing up. They understand the importance of the work. They like to know that they're contributing members of our community and that they are making the world a better place. And they genuinely like the time that they spend with young children. We can be energized by seeing and experiencing the world through their eyes. We can learn along with them, and we can delight in their discovery and wonder and curiosity. And really, it keeps us young.
Star, thank you so much for being here and for sharing your perspective. And another big thank you for all the work you're doing to support children, families, and providers in our community.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been lovely.
I get such a joy out of having true nurturers here on the podcast. And to everyone listening, thank you for joining us for this conversation. These are the kinds of discussions that help us better understand how to support young children and the people who care for them every day. This has been another episode of Nurturing Humboldt.